of January 2024. Introduce myself, I'm Tim Curley. I am the Vice Chair of the committee today. In place of Ross, I will be chairing. And as I've not chaired before, I am actually going to diligently go through the list in front of me, so do excuse me if you've heard this before. I'd like to welcome everybody. No members of the public here today. I don't know if there are any online. Is there one? Yeah, okay, so welcome member of public. Today's meeting will be run using the webcast system via Microsoft Teams. Committee members and key officers physically present in the council chamber at Dean House here in Taunton. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or observe. This meeting is being webcast and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. There may be a slight delay between agenda items. The agenda pack is available via ModGov or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. When you're invited to speak, could you please clearly speak into the microphone and state who you are for the benefit of anyone who is listening to the meeting so they can identify who is speaking. This meeting will be audio recorded. And finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all those present in finding the appropriate information. I bring us to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. We have a few today. So we have apologies from Councillor Christine Lawrence, who has been substituted by Councillor Sue Osborne. Thank you very much. Councillor Richard Wilkins, who has been substituted by Councillor Theo Phillips. Thank you. We've also got Ross Henley, of course, not here today. He's given his apologies. And I believe we have Helen Kay and Emily Pearlstone online. So welcome. So agenda item 2 brings us to the minutes of the previous meeting. And I'd like to confirm the accuracy of the meeting, of the minutes held on the 18th of October 2023. Does anyone have any comments on these minutes?
I have a query on page 11, please.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, if you want to speak.
Let me just find it. We agreed that there was a split in the last meeting about whether or not members of the Constitution and Governance Committee should be on the task and finish group for the planning constitution, looking at the planning constitution. And on page 11, above where it says resolved, Councillor Dawn Johnson proposed the following amendment, which Councillor Helen Kay duly seconded, that all councillors be surveyed to ask for feedback and comments on the Planning Committee terms of reference, which would feed into the work of the Constitution Review Working Group for the Planning Committee. The vote was taken with 9 votes for and 1 abstention. Therefore, the amendment was carried. Can one of the officers confirm that all other councillors were invited to comment on the Planning Committee terms of reference and to forward their observations to either the task and finish group or to whoever?
Scott, David, are you able to comment on that? Yes, Scott.
I can certainly check in terms of specific surveys, but I know that we have used certainly all the survey results that members have had the opportunity to complete as part of the planning committees themselves. So part of the work that we've been doing with planning officers and our legal officers has been looking at those survey results. I suppose over and above using those surveys, there hasn't been any additional surveys sent out to all councillors, no, but we have got the benefit of members' feedback from the planning committee surveys, and we have got quite a lot of feedback from that.
Can I come back on that, please? What was mentioned at the last Planning and Constitution meeting was that those surveys were that we were asked to fill out after every planning meeting were a survey as to the efficiency of the meetings themselves. And there were questions like, you know, did the chair do their job well? There were questions like that on it. It wasn't really. It was partially related to the planning constitution, but those surveys were not specifically related to the planning constitution. For example, in the way things that are referred up to the planning meetings and the amount of time given for councillors to respond and who gets the last say so in that referral process. That sort of thing was not asked on those surveys, and that is why I believe Dawn and I put forward that extra amendment to ask that other councillors be invited to make comments if they so wished. This relates to something later on in the agenda, which I will bring up later, about how we then deal with what the task and finish has come forward with. But I'll leave it for there. I'm just a bit disappointed that other councillors have not been asked to contribute to this this work the task and finish group has done. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Sue.
I know I'm substituting today, so thank you for that, Tim. But I could certainly confirm that the sheets we had at planning, as you know, they're basically what I would have called a course appraisal form, like how good was it for you? Was the presentation clear? Was the meeting clearly chaired? I think I referred to them jokingly as a how was it for you, darling form. There was absolutely nothing in there about what we thought of the terms of reference, how we felt the scheme of referral is or isn't working. It did not cover those issues, and I can confirm that I've certainly not seen anything in my email, and I don't think anything's been raised at planning. Tim, you may wish to correct me on that.
Thank you, Sue. Just go over to Dawn.
No, that's absolutely fine. Sorry, Helen, I wasn't aware you'd been involved in that vote, but yeah, absolutely. It did come on the back of quite a long conversation that people felt that not everyone was aware of the consultation, and that a letter would go out to signpost people to that consultation so that all councillors could work with their parish councils to make sure they picked up everything they felt their parish councils might want to contribute. And I understand that letter hasn't happened, but I'm just wondering if that next meeting we have, where I think it's scrutiny chairs and someone else invited, whether we could broaden that to all councillors so that everyone can have a view. I don't know if it's too late for those views to be incorporated now, or where we stand with the process.
Yes, Mandy.
Just to top it off, it's quite clear the recommendation that was proposed, seconded and approved was that all councillors be surveyed to ask for feedback and comments. And I don't think, from what I understand, that's been done currently.
If I could just say, I agree with all the comments I think that have been said. I just think there's a piece of work here that we just haven't yet done. I think it does need to be done, and I think this is the conversation in this room has emphasised that. So I think that's something we need to take away and make sure that that resolution actually is carried through. Yes, Dawn.
Can I just come back on that? So in terms of where we are in the process, can all those further comments that might come forward still be incorporated, or have we gone beyond that point?
I mean, the current position is the work that's been done with the planning chairs and vice chairs has looked for a whole series of areas that's come through member feedback and comments to date, including things such as the referral process. That group, together with planning officers and other officers supporting that review, have got a series of recommendations to bring to a joint workshop. Clearly, there's an opportunity for that workshop to be broadened so that members are assured, for want of a better phrase, or feel they have enough further opportunity to understand, are there views or ideas about parts of the committee terms of reference, have they been fully considered, and in what way, and to what extent is it proposed to be changed? I mean, that could still be facilitated through expanding the attendance at the joint workshop.
I make a proposal that is done, and I don't know if we need to vote on that, but I think that would be helpful just to ensure that all councillors have been fully aware of what's taking place, because we all miss emails, we all miss, you know, the relevance of things that are happening. And I think it would be a useful thing to broaden that. So that I would like to propose that if there's a seconder, or it needs a vote.
But before we go to the second, there's a few other hands up. But I just very quickly like to say on that, I do very much view that the remit of this committee is the final assurance for these things. So a lot of these working groups are going off to give us some recommendations. Well, actually, all of that is going to be filtered through this committee. And I don't want to make an awful lot of work and invite all 110 councillors perhaps to the committee. That would be a little bit of a nightmare. So we perhaps need to triage that. But I do feel that the final assurance is through this committee, and that's where the final decision will be made. So a couple of questions. We'll go to Mandy first.
Yeah, just quick to be pedantic. We are just here for the accuracy of the minutes. The minutes are accurate, and we have got an item later in the agenda. So I think perhaps it could better come there than here. So
I would agree. These are
just proposing the minutes are accurate from what I've read, even though they haven't been actioned, which we can pick up.
Do we have a second of that, and then we'll revisit your proposal at the right point if you're happy with that? Yeah. Okay, and thank you, Martin, for seconding. All those in favour, this is a true. Thank you, carried. Okay, so on to item 3, declarations of interest. Members will be invited to declare any interests regarding to any matters on the agenda and to specify the nature of that interest. The chair to the meeting, apart from the standard declarations of panel members in relation to their membership of town parish councils, which are published on the council website. On to agenda item number 4, which is public question time. We have had no submissions. I don't know whether we have any members of the public online wishing to speak. No, they've not registered anyway. Okay, so on to the next item, which is the meat of the business today, and that is the Constitution and the update on its review. And if I could hand over to Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'm not going to take you through literally line by line. Hopefully you can already see from the update the work that's been progressed through the 3 groups. Group 1 obviously drawn from the membership of this committee, looking particularly at the work around the council's procedures, public participation, and therefore looking around some potential areas where there could be improvements, again reflecting on member experience and member feedback over the last 9 months. So it's again intended that those recommendations are brought forward to the next meeting. Group 2, where we've just been discussing in terms of the matters arising, Group 2 focused on the planning committee terms of reference. Again, you can see reference there to the several meetings that have been held of that working group, and in particular the work that's focused on some of the areas of improvement, such as increasing the strategic planning committee functions, improving the references to rights of way and village greens. For those that have taken a very careful look at the terms of reference, other than a short reference at the beginning, most of the references throughout that terms of reference are dominated by planning rather than also balancing that with the rights of way and village green matters, such as on things like public speaking. There's also been a lot of work focused on how representations can be made to the committees, both through the public speaking arrangements and also in terms of member representations. And I think a key one that's come through from a number of comments, both at the last meeting and also even today, there's been a particular focus on the referral processes that divisional members can use, and also parish councils can use in order to effectively escalate a matter to one of the relevant planning committees. So those have been the sort of key areas that working group's focused on. And again, there are quite a number of improvements and suggested changes to the current terms of reference to deal with those. The intention with those, you'll recall, was that there was an ask from this committee that we then hold a joint workshop so that members of the committee could meet with the working group, receive their recommendations, an update in terms of their work, and then obviously use that as a means then to review ahead of the final proposals coming forward to the next meeting of this committee. So that's the intention in terms of the Group 2 work. Group 3 work followed exactly the same process as Group 2 in terms of licensing and regulatory. It's probably fair to say in terms of the areas of change, they're more limited. in terms of from the experience. There are some areas where there have been some identified improvements. But again, from the working group's perspective, the working group, I suppose, and it's raised in the report, are raising the question of this committee, whether the committee still feels a workshop with them would be of value. And again, if you compare it to the potential areas of change compared to planning and licensing, the licensing ones are much lighter touch in terms of scale. So again, you'll see there's a question as part of this report as to whether you want to proceed with a joint workshop for that as well. The key recommendations you can see obviously set out in the report, one in terms of noting when the recommendations are coming forward from Group 1, 2, the proposal for Group 2 on the planning committee, holding that joint workshop, and it's intended that joint workshop is held in the middle of February. And then Group 3's recommendation is that a joint workshop is not held, but actually that its recommendations are shared ahead of them being formally being presented. And again, those are effectively the recommendations and the proposals for you to debate.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have any questions? Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you very much. I don't know why we can't just have one workshop. I don't know why we were going to have two in the first place. So for me, the main questions and queries I think we've already seen will be around the planning committee terms of reference. I think that's potentially more contentious and more areas probably for improvement than licensing regulatory. So I think I would still welcome one, but I don't see why you couldn't have two items on the agenda, i.e. planning committees and then licensing and regulatory if anything comes up that they feel they need to talk to us about. So that's what, and that would be a change of recommendation because the recommendation is only talking about for Group 3. So I don't know how we could change that recommendation around to say that we would like it to come back for Group 2, 1, 2 and 3 even, that they all come in one meeting. And the second one would obviously be picking up what we've raised earlier, that we would just ask that it's noted that piece of work around consultation with councillors still needs to be undertaken in line with the agreed minutes. So I think we probably need a little bit of an amendment there, Chair.
Thank you. Yes.
Is that better? I understood all these changes to the constitution were going to full council in February. If there's a workshop on the 15th of February to discuss the planning changes and other changes which we noted back in October last year, isn't it all getting a bit unseemly haste to get it all done?
Scott.
Again, if it's just helpful, I mean, the intended changes to the constitution are scheduled to go forward to the annual general meeting in May, not to February.
But that does give us a little bit more time, and you're right, it would be very rushed to get it done for February. So I think in relation, Mandy, to what you said, I think when we come down to Group 3, my thoughts on that with the licensing is it's much more specialised than a lot of the other. I think a lot of people have a lot of input when it comes to planning, but I think when it comes to licensing, you're dealing with quite a specialist sort of legal framework. And in some ways, I think actually you want to let the experts come up with the recommendations on that. So I'm inclined to agree with you, I think, with the third one. I'd just like some clarity on what you were saying with the first two. I'm not sure I understood that.
So for me, if we're going to have a session on it, you could have 3 items on the agenda to cover all the sort of 3 areas that have been looked at, just a 3-item agenda, bring it into one meeting. I'm just really conscious of officers and time, and to me, one meeting, the less number of meetings you can have. And I think, you know, with all of it, there is a sort of legal element, be it planning or licensing, really.
Yeah, Stephen.
So just to clarify, what I think Councillor Chilcott is suggesting, which I would support, is that we have a single workshop where all of these things are brought before us. So we accept the fact that there may not be a huge amount that we have to discuss regarding licensing at that workshop, but nevertheless it gives us the opportunity to do so if necessary. So focus on one workshop and bring all of the things to that workshop prior to it then coming back to the formal meeting of this committee. Is that right, member?
Yeah, I think there's a balance, isn't there, between, you're absolutely right, draw on officers' time with perhaps overwhelming the meeting. Yeah, and I think that's maybe why they were separated out, so there wasn't just too much going in. Don't know whether I can get any feedback from the officers whether they think that that is a viable to combine them. Scott.
I mean, it's certainly an option. I can see it from an efficiency perspective. The only thing it's likely to do, though, is dictate when that workshop is. By combining all of those elements, you're probably looking at a workshop around about the middle of March towards the late March, in order to ensure that all those various proposals are ready at the same time. And again, just reflecting in terms of, clearly February's a very busy month anyway in terms of budget proposals. It's probably also more realistic to think about that workshop being around middle of March.
I've got no objections to that. I'm happy to be guided by the committee. So I don't know how, if people want to combine them, or if somebody wants to make a proposal to combine them. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, with licensing, we came up with a number of things, a wish list, but because licensing is so constrained by statutory instruments, is that the right word? It's very little we could change on licensing, to be honest. We can tweak some things, but actually changing the numbers, the who can sit on committees, who can sit on subcommittees, proportionality, it's all set in stone, really, so it's very hard to change. So I think a joint working group meeting would be better, because I don't think there'll be much to say on licensing, to be quite honest.
If I could bring Helen Kay in.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just following on from the point I raised in the minutes, and I did say that it would come up later in the meeting, that are we going to somehow at this point discuss how we might get feedback from other councillors, or have we, or the people in the room, agreed that we're going to keep the scope of discussion narrow and just with the Constitution and Governance members, or do we want to somehow broaden the scope or survey the views of other councillors, and how might we do that in a managed fashion? It may not be appropriate to have 110 councillors coming to our workshop, though I must say that in the past there were only a handful, maybe about 4 or 5 that actually attended online the Constitution and Governance Committee meetings because they were interested in planning in particular. So I don't think we'll get 110. So I'm just wondering what's the best way to somehow get the views of those 4 or 5 other councillors that might not even know we're doing this work.
I think that's a really valid point. I think one of the issues that we've had is I think every single councillor could probably come with something that they wanted to discuss or change. And I think we could very easily overwhelm ourselves at the beginning of this process. So I think that we were trying to get the work done to try and narrow down as to what the most salient points were. And I think that those more personal interventions, I think there will be room for people to come and do that at a later date. I just think that if we were trying to get the opinions of every single councillor at this point, it would have been a massive piece of work, and I think we would have almost become lost in it. So I think in a way we've had to sort of triage it. So I would hope that we would get to that point that you are, but I can see why we haven't yet. Yes, Sue.
I would agree with Helen, and for what it's worth, if Helen hadn't have shared her email with me and several others, I wouldn't be here because I wouldn't have known this discussion was taking place. And as you know, Tim, I do care about planning, very much so. And to be very honest, I think the current arrangements as they stand almost feel like it's sapping the satisfaction out of the job for all sorts of reasons. I'd be very uncomfortable if the only people feeding into this were chairs and vice chairs of committees, because they have a totally disparate perspective. And as I think been observed by Councillor Kay, there is an awful lot of power concentrated in those chairs and vice chairs at the moment. They can just arbitrarily make a decision. For example, there was a decision taken in my ward that it went to the chair and the vice chair. I had barely any time to come back at all before the chair had made his mind up that it didn't need to come to committee. He didn't bother picking up a phone to discuss it or communicate. And yet there were points that I would have liked to have raised, which I did in my reply to him. And he very kindly, condescendingly decided that he would write to me. So I really do think, if nothing else, you do need to get the views of other planning members. And the questionnaire you sent out, which was, as I called it, how is it for you, darling? A basic course appraisal, was not fit for purpose in getting the information that you actually want, which is, are the terms of reference working? Does the scheme of delegation work for you? Are you comfortable with how you are able to get applications to committee? Because at the moment, frankly, I feel I'd have more success threading a needle with a sausage than I would trying to get something to committee.
I have to say I agree with a lot of those criticisms. I think that there's a piece of work that we do need to do on planning, and I also share your reservation that the final decision and the input shouldn't just be from the chairs. But I think at this stage we almost needed a skeleton to hang the rest of the work on, which is why I think the chairs have enabled us to try and build that up. What I would be really displeased with is if the input from members going forward, once that piece of work has been done, isn't included. But I think it's a staged, and I think the direction of travel, I want to get to exactly where you are, but it's just how do we get there without overwhelming the process?
Yeah, hence why I suggested at the very minimum that planning committee members and substitutes should be given that opportunity. I think what is also, I find difficult at this point discussing this, is that I also think that the personalities of the different chairs and vice chairs come into it. And I bet you, if I was to do a crawl around the other committees, which I haven't done, you would see a completely different culture and approach.
I think Mandy was next, and then Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just picking up, I think there's two things here. I think we need to change the wording of the recommendation, but can I just ask or request that the minutes for this meeting reflect that all councillors are still to be surveyed to ask for feedback and comments, as was agreed in the last meeting. I think if we can just note that in the minutes, hopefully that will ensure that that still happens, because it was agreed and we've all agreed the minutes, which is where it was said. Thank you.
I'm more than happy with that, absolutely, yeah.
And following on from that, personally, what I would find helpful is if that survey of all members could be undertaken so that the feedback was obtained before the workshop, and then it informed the workshop.
Yeah,
that I think is the way that it would feed through most successfully. So then that would answer the point I think that Dawn raised, and it would be of benefit to us to make the workshop more valuable.
I agree 100%. Yeah.
I think it is very unfortunate, because this is exactly what we were trying to get to, that everybody felt they'd had an input, and that's what was agreed at the last meeting, that everyone would be asked for their views, or just even to be, I think the request was they were directed to the consultation taking place so that everybody knew there was a consultation. Please make sure your input is represented. It's really unfortunate that didn't happen, because now we're in this position of how can we pick it up prior to any decisions getting made. And my concern is equally that I am not finding the process at the moment very easy to navigate. I'm never sure, have I got to fill in the form? Have I not got to fill in the form? If I have a chat with my chair, will it go to committee? Will it not go to committee? It's not really a process that many people are finding is really clear. And I think there's a lot of people who perhaps are representing planning applications in their areas would really welcome almost a briefing or something about these proposals, so they could fully understand what the decisions or proposals are, and then they could express their views prior to anything getting decided. So I just need to know what process is going to be in place to ensure that members, councillors' views are heard, they are allowed an input, and that will then be considered prior to any decisions being made. And I'm not hearing what that process is going to be.
If David wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for members for that action not having been actioned first and foremost. But what I think I'm hearing is that if there's a desire to combine that workshop, noting that the planning will be the major item on there, that gives us opportunity to push it back a little bit, push it back into March. That then therefore gives us the opportunity to get that survey out in the coming weeks, and giving members enough time to respond to that, to inform the workshop as was originally intended. So on one part, an apology for it not happening before now, but I think if we push the workshop back 4 weeks, then we can still get the outcomes that was originally intended. So hopefully that satisfies you, Councillor Johnson, and sets the way forward.
That's very satisfactory. Do I need to make a proposal for that, or how does that need to happen now?
Just looking at the recommendations, I think we'll have to amend the recommendations to take that into account, just in terms of the timing. So a proposal to come forward to amend the workshop date later in March, combine the workshop into all 3 streams of the constitution review, and that survey is issued imminently to inform that workshop.
Yeah, so exactly that. Can I make that proposal, please?
That was during the minutes, I thought, was it not? So we then brought it back to the rest of the meeting, but forgive me.
Right, so that's fine, but the conversation started around actually amending one of the recommendations. So we want to amend also what's there.
Agreed.
I think I'm proposing everything that's included in the conversations that's gone before, that everything gets combined into one meeting, and that meeting should take place at a later date to allow for a consultation survey to be sent out to all members, so that everybody's input could be considered prior to that meeting of the 3 points.
So coming back and being pedantic, so the second recommendation in the paper is that we confirm which of the 2 options it would like to progress in relation to consideration of the recommendations to work group 3 licensing and regulatory committee. So we also have to deal with that recommendation, because we're sort of going over that recommendation. I'm just being pedantic, but we've got 2 to vote on here, so we need to decide what we're doing with that as well. So it's whether you want to totally rewrite that recommendation. I think that's probably, so I think you need to amend.
It's
Steve, yeah. It almost sort of supersedes 2, doesn't it? Because we're taking three in. So in a way, we could just replace that, strike that out, and replace it with.
Chair, is that going to be a separate proposal, that we replace recommendation 2 with an amended recommendation 3?
As a new chair, you'll give me all the hard questions, aren't you? If I refer to one of the officers.
Horrible. But
So,
the
Chair.
expert is sitting to the right of you.
Yeah, well, the committee will have to have 2 votes. So the first vote will to make amendment to the substantive motion, so to overwrite the second part of that recommendation with what the process we've just discussed. And then if that's adopted, then the committee will need to vote on the overall amended proposal.
Yes, Mandy.
We have a go at a word. Don't we have a go at?
I would love you to. That would be brilliant. Thank you.
So we are going to confirm that we would like to proceed to still have a not a working group, what did they call it? A workshop, but to consider in that workshop all 3 topics. Does that cover what's there?
To facilitate the survey of all members in respect of the changes to the planning. Yes.
To include, yeah, thank you.
Got some furious scribbling going on. I'll let people finish writing.
And just to pick up following that, can I also, not for minuting, but not for including, but ask that the planning is put last on that agenda, so you don't lose the other items within the planning, just to raise that.
I don't know if anyone has that in a form that can be read back. We'll go to Barry whilst we're waiting.
Thank you. Does this mean in English that the 15th of February workshop on planning is cancelled? Yeah?
Yes.
Right. And can I ask if the next workshop, which is good use, is going to take place later in March? I cannot do it until after the 13th or 14th.
Yep.
So I won't be there if you do it the first week of March. Right?
I'll try and remember.
Well, I am very keen, and I've put stuff to Scott and David about the planning and the issues that Sue raised particularly, because I think there is a bit of nonsense goes on with chairs and vice chairs, which I would like to see stopped. And it can be done very simply. As Scott knows, I've sent him the proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Scott, I don't know whether you have that available.
I think what you're seeking to do through the amendment is to confirm the holding of a joint workshop in March to consider the review and recommendations from the 3 working groups and to receive the all-member survey results on the planning committee terms of reference.
Is everybody happy with that wording?
We say that something's going to go out to all members.
The purpose, that's because you've already resolved that at your previous meeting. There's no need to resolve that again.
Okay.
Martin?
Happy to take that vote first. I've got a comment to make. Happy if you wish to proceed with that vote first, Chair, before I say something. It's related, but it's not going to scupper it. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, the only thing I want to clarify now is who was proposing that. You're happy to propose that? I have a seconder. Mandy is seconder. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Martin?
I just want to make the point, Chair, as going back to planning, as probably more a planning matter than constitution governance, but given that we're all stuck in our respective local plans, is the one thing that has remained as local. And listening to the conversation this morning on Planning East, I don't recognise some of the issues that my colleagues in other areas have mentioned. I was wondering, is there an issue for officers to get together and try and ally processes across the different areas? Because otherwise I think there'll be different ways of doing things across the 4 areas, which will perpetuate. I mean, I don't have any particular problem with the way things are referred at the moment, as others may do, but it all seems fairly clear cut to me, but also in other areas that's not the case. I think there's a bit of work to be done there, and needs to be done at a fairly technical officer level, I would have thought.
If any of the officers would like to respond to that? Dawn? Sorry. I'm tunnel visioned over there, you see. Yeah.
I think the process that's in place now is unfamiliar to a lot of people who didn't used to operate that way. I think it's familiar to some who possibly did operate that way historically. For those of us that didn't operate that way, it has created a little bit of confusion. So I suggest that might be where the difference is, because I think it came from your area potentially as an idea on how processes worked. And I think the feedback from those who haven't been used to that is where it's most relevant, because they are the ones who are particularly finding it something that is a bit clunky for them to work with.
If I bring Christine in online. And if you could hear me, Christine, I was going to bring you in. You're muted if you're trying to speak.
Okay.
That's better, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say I agree with what you've been saying. I'm playing catch up today, but it's a very interesting conversation. I definitely believe that different areas do work in slightly different ways naturally, because it's historic when things develop. So it would be good to share out how we do it to make it more formalised, and the fact that we all work together. And especially as we're rurality comes into a lot of the problems with planning, and they're different to the town and country planning, which other people are used to. So I think the more variety and breadth of work we do, the better. It won't make it quicker, sadly, but I think it'll be a better way of understanding because, like has been mentioned a couple of times, it's not quite clear at the moment and it can get very complicated.
I do agree, and I think just to say on the diversity of opinions, this is one of the things that's hit me as the vice chair of the committee. Lots of people have come to me with very different and often contradictory solutions and problems, and I think this is where there is quite a bit of work that we do still need to work through. Mandy.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think when the initial training for all councillors was undertaken, certainly the planning training, I think for me there was more contention and confusion around this and the planning probably than any other training event that I went to. So I think it has been run very differently in different areas. I think as one council, we need to have uniformity and we need it to be as simple as it can be so everybody can understand. And to a degree, you know, there are very different characters involved in planning chairs, all have a slightly different way of chairing, but we need a uniformity so that we have similar right around the county, and I hope that that'll be something that rolls out of the review.
I think it's also worth noting the culture that has come across from 4 separate district councils, and no matter what we try and do in terms of the constitution, that culture will remain for a while, and it will take a while for us to have that joint sort of feeling of us owning this issue. Sue.
Yeah, I think it sort of reflects a bit as well, because having worked for planning in an area-based system, both you and I know there was differences between the different area committees, even though you're still operating to the same local plan, the same policies. So we do need consistency, particularly in sort of things like quality of response. Like, for instance, I still feel aggrieved that I had to write more or less a Shakespearean essay to get something to committee in terms of planning reasons. And in another area committee, all you needed to do was say, I want it to go to committee, and the joint board member said, I think so too, and it duly went to committee. Whereas, and by the way, my Shakespearean essay was rejected. So that made it even worse. So I think it is important you have consistency. Certainly from my point of view, we actually worked very hard through a planning workshop in South Somerset to come up with Planning Reimagined. And as far as I was concerned, our scheme of delegation was as good as it's got. And I sometimes feel that at a time I was the only member on South Somerset on the committee, so talk about feeling the only gay in the village. That was how you felt at times, and I sometimes felt as well that there was a sort of little bit of sort of antipathy that, oh well, you know, we don't want to be told what to do with South Somerset. But to be honest, the work we did on Planning Reimagined led to some real improvements. And I do think our scheme of delegation was as good as it's going to get, which was, it was simple. If there was a disagreement between anybody and an officer, the officer referred it to you to decide, do you want this to go to committee, or are you happy with the decision the officer's making? The odds are 9 times out of 10 you agree with the officer when you read the report. The other times you don't, and in which case say, I want it to go to committee and this is why. And other times you may get requests from parish councils, whatever, who feel that nobody listens to them. Please, can you put this to committee? And that's the other bit I feel strongly about, is that as elected members, we should be allowed to ask for anything to go to committee at any time in the process, up until you receive the officer's report. Because this whole business, if you've got to do it in 3 weeks, well, what if it's a complicated planning application and there's things come out the woodwork subsequently? And you have got requests then, and you feel actually this does need to really go committee, because there's issues coming forward now, like heritage, when it wasn't identified as a problem. So I do think this whole business, if it's 3 weeks or no, actually it undermines councillors, when at the moment a parish council can object and it goes to committee, which we've seen as well.
So from a personal perspective, I'm quite glad there's a time period on it, because I can.
They're well under the old scheme.
Yeah,
in that
otherwise I
respect.
procrastinate on the very complicated cases forever. So I think I need that firm deadline sometimes. Stephen.
There is a deadline still.
I'm sure what Sue says is very valid. We are in slight danger of having the workshop conversation now, though. So perhaps having lodged all of those points, and I think what Martin was saying is something valid for us to bear in mind, perhaps
That can be rolled forward.
indeed it can now be rolled forward
We can roll that forward.
and left at that point.
Simon.
Thank you. I am a sub, but I haven't sat on the planning committee. The view I take is licensing, we've had to integrate across the 4 areas, and people from the different areas sit on different licensing subcommittees, and we're all using the same template. There were differences. There was one area that was doing things slightly differently and still probably want to, but we seem to have come together better. And the trouble with planning, or the problem is, they're still in their bunkers to a large extent, and we do it this way down here. So I think there needs to be a look at the templates they use have got to be uniform, that sort of thing, and perhaps training again, or getting people to sit in a planning committee, even if they're not making a decision, in attendance at a planning committee in a different area, just so they can integrate with each other. And the final thing was the survey, what's going to be in it?
Scott, is that one for you?
Again, yeah, I mean, something we can review. A bit of this coming back.
And I think we probably do want to tighten it down. I think what's very clear from just the conversation in this room is, people can talk for a very long time about planning and changes they want to make, and actually you could end up chasing your tail for an entire day where people don't agree. So I think we do need to be quite careful that we just don't open the floor to every single view all at once, which is why I think we've tried to do it in this staged way. Whether we've achieved as we wanted to, I'm not entirely sure. We'll see what the end product is, but I'm quite happy that this process was necessary, really, to stop us becoming overwhelmed with a lot of these personal opinions. Are there any other? Dawn.
Just to answer Simon's point, there was a survey that was sent out that all members of the public could respond to. So I was imagining that same survey would be circulated to all councillors, or are you imagining that might be something different?
And I have a question as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably up to us as a committee, is it? Or do you think that's probably more officer-led? I'll leave that.
Again, in terms of the member survey, certainly, yeah, we'll design it around the planning terms of reference, focus it purely on that in terms of areas of focus, and then any suggested areas for review, in effect, what suggested improvements or changes would members like to see. That's the intention of that member survey, to identify, hopefully what I would anticipate, certainly from the member feedback that we've already got and the work that's been done through that working group and the work that's been brought in by planning officers and also the licensing officers and our legal officers, is that I would be very surprised that an all-member survey will identify any new points, personally. I think what it will do, though, is perhaps give a sense of, we've got X% of members with concerns about the referral process, far more than we have about, say, the functions and the areas of work. So it will help validate, give a sense of scale for where change is definitely needed from a member's perspective. So I think it will help provide that sort of qualitative evidence. But certainly the amount of information that we've gathered already as part of the review, has been considerable on both the planning and on the licensing and regulatory in terms of the areas. But we can certainly design that. I mean, that survey, we can certainly design it and issue it during February. So that it adds, like I say, to that sort of qualitative evidence in terms of, is it covering all the areas that we believe it has?
Thank you, Scott. If I could bring Helen in.
Oh.
Sorry, you have a supplemental. So, sorry, Helen, we got a supplemental first.
It's just clarifying. So the request at the last meeting was that survey consultation that was out to all parties would get circulated to all councillors as a reminder that this consultation was out there and they may want to ensure they respond to it. So the consultation that happened previously, has that now got done and dusted? That's not something that you feel is relevant anymore if we are going out to councillors? Was there anything about that consultation that existed that is not something you can just simply pull forward to send out to councillors again? Are you saying that that would not cover what you think councillors want to talk about or want to raise? I don't know where that consultation's gone.
The analysis of that consultation's gone through that working group. It's provided the headlines in terms of the areas already. But again, I'm reflecting in terms of some other members' observations about there was some concern that it wasn't as detailed in terms of the terms of reference, which is why I think a fresh survey will help provide a more broader opportunity to ensure that it's covering every single part of the terms of reference. I mean, in simple terms, the all member survey will be, here are the current terms of reference with an accompanying survey organised by section. So the terms of reference are organised into sections. It will ask questions such as the public speaking arrangements. Do members feel there need to be any changes to the current arrangements? And then open questions, if so, where, the amount of time, the number of speakers, that sort of thing.
I'm being really pedantic here because I'm really getting confused. So there were sheets of paper that we were asked to complete when we attended, and that's what you're calling the member survey. There was also a public consultation, which was the thing that was asked to be. Okay.
The work of the Constitution Working, that's what I'm saying. Whilst an all-member survey clearly has not been done, we have used all of the results from that analysis, from public feedback and the member forms that were completed. That has been used. I suppose I'm keen to emphasise we have taken on board a fair amount of feedback already.
So if I could just come in there, I think this is more about sort of assuring members that they've had an opportunity, because I think an awful lot of the issues that are going to be picked up, you're absolutely right, have been picked up already. But there's always going to be one or two members that have missed an email and are going to feel that they've not had a chance to input. So I think this is a really good opportunity to have that safety net to make sure that everybody feels included. Yes, Barry.
The planning committee forms that were filled in at the end of each planning session, they didn't actually cover everything I think people like Dawn and Helen speaking online are concerned about. There are not items on, I mean, I've got particular issues which Scott knows what they are, Claire knows what they are, and Ross knows what they are, and David knows what they are. There was nowhere on those forms that those issues could have been brought out and raised. So I'm sure there are people who've got issues that have still yet to be raised, Chair.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Helen, if I could bring you in. Sorry, I should have brought you in a moment ago.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to suggest, I don't know if you've seen it in the chat, that something similar to what Scott suggested, that since the Task and Finish group has now met 3 times and is about to get ready for a proposal for a workshop on the 15th of February, they will already have a series of recommendations. So what we could do is, in surveying all the other members that haven't yet had a chance to input to this, is we could sort of frame that new survey that's going to go out in those terms. I think that we were talking slightly at cross purposes before. There's I don't know if Dawn might be thinking of the statement of community involvement, which went out a while ago, and that did go out to communities, I think, and to everybody. I think that is now done and dusted. And then there was also the ones that we were asked to fill in at the actual planning committee meetings, which we all feel didn't really cover everything we wanted them to cover. So the way we format this new survey, if you like, could be the way that Scott suggested, which would be great, but could also sort of somehow get in the recommendations of this Task and Finish group. Is that an approach we could take?
You've got me thinking there. I don't know if the officers have got any opinions on that. No, but I'm glad to see Mandy does.
I think it's a chicken and egg, really, because you really need those questions and fed back into the working group as opposed to the other way round. And I think timing wise, I don't think you can do it before and after. So I think for me, I would want the group that are looking at it to look at all the information in its entirety, including feedback from councillors, before they make their recommendations back.
Okay, I'm happy to go with that too.
I think that's probably the most practical solution, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, are there any more questions? No? Okay, so I think the next thing is to refer the committee to the recommendations. So to note the progress being made with the review of the constitution by the working groups and the specific areas identified. And then I think we're all happy. Personally, I'm quite happy to have noted that. I hope everybody else is. And then item 2, which of course is the replacement. And I don't know whether I can get Scott to read that out again.
That would be to confirm the holding of a joint workshop in March to consider the review and recommendations from the 3 working groups and to receive the all-member survey results on the planning committee terms of reference.
Mandy, are you proposing that? Yeah. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Sue. All those in favour? Lovely, carried unanimously.
Chair, if we can go late March, all to the good, I think.
Brilliant. Okay, if we come on to the next agenda item 6, which is the assurance on preparation for a May 2024 elections. If I could invite Stephen Lake to give us a verbal update, please.
Thank you, Chair. Most of it's on the screen anyway. We've started with our detailed project plan, and it is a Somerset-wide detailed project plan, despite the fact we still have 4 offices. And I should say that yesterday I did sign off on the election management system, which is now one across the whole of Somerset. So we're all using exactly the same system, and actually working on each other's areas. So we are one team, but in 4 offices. The risk registers being prepared. The Police and Crime Commissioner elections are controlled by the police area returning officer who works in Baines. Therefore, he is making the overall decisions, and he changed one last night. I'll come back to that later. We've contacted all the polling stations that we usually use, or some others which we've had to change because we always do have to change them. And we have staff training from the Association of Electoral Administrators. When it says whatever scenario, I added those words because, of course, there could be a parliamentary election on the same day. So we're having to plan for different scenarios, which may or may not happen. We have delivered training for the deputy returning officers who will be at the counts and at in the 4 areas to oversee the elections in those areas, both at Police and Crime Commissioner and parliamentary level. Staff recruitment is well underway. The change we had last night was to the way that the count will be run. It was originally going to be run on Friday night and Thursday night and Friday. It's now going to be all run overnight on Thursday. So we will verify the votes and count them in the early hours of Friday morning. So we have these 4 count venues. I hope you can recognise them. J24 is the Junction 24. It's a big venue. The Bath and West Showground, Westlands, and Wellsprings. We've chosen those 4 for the Police and Crime Commissioner elections because they are big enough also to use for the parliamentary in case it happens. Again, we're trying to plan the 2. We've ordered envelopes for postal voting, not just for one election, but for two. We have 80,000 postal voters, so since each one gets two envelopes, that's now 320,000 envelopes we've ordered, which gives some idea of the scale that we're working to. For the Police and Crime Commissioners, we will have yellow ballot papers because, again, if we have a parliamentary election, it will go on white. So we're, again, pre-planning just in case. We've had meetings with the police area returning officer online, and we will having them monthly. The timetable will commence on the 18th of March with the notice of election. Now that is earlier than necessary, but that is to coincide with Bristol, who will be having their own elections. We thought it was sensible that they had the same time scale across all elections, otherwise it will get more confusing. However, if we have a parliamentary election, that will have a different timetable. We can't presuppose what that's going to be. The changes in the handling of postal votes, I will touch on a bit later because it's going to affect you all. We've got some forms which Claire's got down the other end, which if you are going to hand in a postal vote, you have to fill out a form. Postal votes that don't come through the post and are not covered by one of those forms will be rejected. If somebody puts it in a letterbox outside of council offices, it's rejected. This is why I'm going to actually perhaps spell it out a bit clearer later, but obviously you can see there's a problem coming.
Could I just ask, you used to be able to put your postal votes in the ballot box. Are you still able to do that?
You can bring it to the polling station and the staff in the polling station and yourself, this is a big version, there is a small version, will have to fill out a form in the polling station as well. So we could discuss it a bit. I'll just finish this and then you can tear me to pieces. But obviously we're going to have to be absolutely certain that all staff across the council recognise this change. We will count in 4 areas and both verify and give the result as an aggregated figure. So one person, i.e. the returning officer, Duncan, will announce the result from one of the 4 centres. We're still awaiting the pay bands which the government are going to set up. Previously, they had fixed pay levels. Then they decided that didn't work. So they scrapped pay levels altogether. Now they're reintroducing them, but as bands. So we've still been partly arguing with them about that. I think they're London centric, which is always difficult in a rural area. For example, they feel that poll clerks in a polling station don't need a mileage allowance because obviously they just come from around the corner. So I think we've now convinced them that actually in rural areas people do have to drive. So you can see the sheer numbers of staff involved. It's a considerable number of people. And a lot of them are outsiders. We will try and persuade as many staff as possible to become involved because it's extremely useful to have them available. And sometimes general elections are at the top of a hat, drop of a hat, aren't they? So it gives you some idea of the sort of work that we're doing in the background, because this is what 1,500 plus people that we're trying to employ for one day. Yeah, ask away.
Dawn.
Just a clarification, is that if there was a general election as well as the PPC, would that double for staff or would it create a huge saving by not having to duplicate that number of people?
It would increase the number because we are working on, for PCC election, a Somerset-wide area. When it comes to a parliamentary election, we take in part of North Somerset, part of Baines and part of Mid Devon. So we're running elections which go in 3 areas outside of here. So there's an awful lot more staff involved in that as well.
Sorry, any other questions?
Yeah, can I just clarify that? But the increase is purely due to the increase in the geography. There's still the efficiency across the piece.
There'll be efficiency. We may decide, and probably will, that the turnout is likely to be larger, and therefore we will need to put even more staff in the polling stations to deal with this sort of thing. ID in polling stations that are going to have to be requested, and so on and so forth. There's an awful lot more they have to do there. Chairman, happy to take any questions.
Andy.
Don't know if I've jumped the gun, but are you going to go back and explain that form? Is there a change in legislation that's occurred that we don't know about?
Well, from your reactions, I know you don't know about it. Yes, and the change is specifically to start on the 2nd of May, or for the election on the 2nd of May. So anything that happens in relation to that requires this to fill out. Claire, can you pop a few rounds for me, or just pass them along?
So
this is part of the Conservative Party's manifesto. It's all in the Elections Act. Stopping fraudulent voting.
If I could bring
the same thing, yeah.
If I could bring Theo in, and then I've got one hand up online. I think that might be Christine. Lee Redmond, if you want to come in, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was my hand up, and thank you for the officer for the report. I think it's really interesting and timely. I just picked myself up off the floor because I fell off when you started talking about the way that you would handle postal votes at the polling station. I'm just seeking some clarification. Is there a briefing there that you could issue in relation to that? I'm just going back over the changes in the legislation now because I wasn't. Previously, one of the communications I would have with electors is the fact that postal voters can take it along on the day and just pop it in the box. Now you're saying that they might have to fill a form in when they do so. So it was just clarification around that, and it would be helpful if you could have some clarification around the handling of postal votes that aren't returned by post. Thank you.
Chairman, it is my intention to do a briefing note. But I thought since it was an opportune moment to bring it to you, rather than me write something and you get it cold, because
thank you.
It is scary.
I think I preempted the questions. I don't think you've finished the slideshow yet. So if I will had you. No. Oh, here we were. Brilliant.
The PCC and then.
Oh yeah. Sorry, this goes beyond the PCC. Sorry, I finished that. I mean, for the general election, again, we've done all that preparation work which I referred to for the PCC. We have to order paper because a general election consumes vast amounts of the stuff. And as with envelopes, we've ordered them in advance because otherwise, if you do it the last minute, you're not going to get them easily. So they will be sitting ready for the general election in the printers, ready for use. The printers use white paper for everything and actually tint it rather than buy yellow paper, because we can use any colour we like then. I think so as far as the parliamentary election is concerned, of course, we will be again using consistent count processes across all 4 venues, but they will be counting parliamentary constituencies. So 2 constituencies in 3 of the venues and 1 constituency in the 4th. We will be doing briefings for candidates because obviously there's a lot of them. And we were doing it on a parliamentary constituency basis because again, it's easier, more local. The legislation for the registration of overseas electors, of course, has now kicked in, and we are seeing a considerable number coming in. We're hoping always they're going to actually apply for proxy votes. They can apply for postal votes, but the timetable is extremely short, and it's difficult enough to get Royal Mail to deliver and send it back within Somerset, let alone sending it to Brazil or Australia. So we're hoping they're going to go for proxy voters. But of course, if you've lived overseas for 30 years, you may not know anybody within the area or even Britain anymore. So that creates a new range of problems. So Mandy's got a question.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Mandy.
Had a look at that. Feels like a nonsense because anybody could be filling in. You could put Donald Duck's details in there because if there's no identification. But that aside, just want to ask about those in forces overseas. I know there was a lot of in previous elections. In some areas, they send their papers out before anybody's else's, so they've got a chance to get where they're going and get back in time. Does Somerset do that, or do they just sort of follow through everybody else? I'd just be really keen that they do go out first tranche to give people the best opportunity to get them back again.
As long as they've registered in sufficient time, they will be on the first run that we do. I don't know if it will work this time, but it did work last time, and I'm sure it will be. We actually arrange for the postal votes which are going overseas and to service personnel to be taken straight to Heathrow, where they're sorted and dispatched across the world.
Thank you very much. And the other scenario with this was if someone puts their postal vote in a council post box. I was just, because isn't that what everybody do? People post them back to us through Royal Mail. So if they deliver it to a council office, why does that mean it will be sort of disqualified? I'm not understanding the differences between delivering direct to a council office or the post office delivering it into a council office.
I completely understand your confusion, but they have to be delivered personally to the returning officer or a person actually authorised by the returning officer to receive them. If they're put in a post box, they're not been delivered to the returning officer personally.
Sue. I agree, and I think we need to learn the lessons from the introduction of ID, because although, we had an awful lot of people that were confused by that, and even though a lot of messaging had gone out, still didn't turn up with the right ID. So even if you do the messaging, you can't guarantee. But I do agree we do need to do a lot more with that. Absolutely.
Sorry, Chair, we can't hear what's being said online at the moment.
Sorry, I do apologise, but even if you read on the back, by the time you start getting down to F, G and H, you could find there is room for legal interpretation. And we know what that can mean.
Stephen, I think you had your hand up next.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Just to clarify the position on the parliamentary elections, particularly if they coincide with
PCC.
the PCC, but just listening to what Mr. Lake said subsequently, am I right then in thinking that the 6, 7, 8 constituencies that Somerset will have to deal with will only be counted in 4 centres? So therefore, there will have to be concurrent counts going on in some centres. So does that mean that they actually are concurrent and you basically have 2 sets of counting staff doing them, or are they going to be consecutive? Bearing in mind that most of our constituencies are not particularly urban, and that, as I know perfectly well, if you're bringing in votes from far-flung rural parts, they often don't arrive until quite late. So you can't start, really getting down to grips with everything dead on 1 minute past 10. Sometimes the votes aren't turning up until 11:30.
They will be concurrent counts. Each room, we've got floor plans as to how we're going to set them out. And yes, they will be concurrent because we're supposed to start actual counting as opposed to verifying at 2 o'clock. And that's what we're aiming for. And it should work. That's why we've been planning for months for this to happen. But of course, things will change slightly if it's on the same day as the Police and Crime Commissioner, because of course it will take twice as long to verify what's in each ballot box. And ultimately the count for the Police and Crime Commissioner election will take probably 3 times as long, because the turnout will be nearer 66% than 22%.
And have we ever actually run concurrent counts before in Somerset?
Well, we always run concurrent counts when we do say
parliamentary elections.
Parliamentary elections. The last one we did was 2017, was it? Yeah, when we've had parliamentary district and parish all on the same day. So yes, we have run them.
If I could go to Dawn, then Theo, then Mandy.
I just feel so sorry for you. I'm astounded at this waste of taxpayers' money, creating yet another layer of complication to casting a democratic vote. It just astounds me. And the questions they're asking are just like, where are they heading with this? It's really scary to me. I'm so sorry. I'm absolutely shocked, but I'm still not quite clear. Everybody that returns a postal vote, whether they put it in an envelope at home, have they got to complete one of these if they're putting it in an envelope at home, or is it just literally if someone else is handing it in for them? I'm just not quite clear on the process.
I'll endeavour to explain, Chair. I think the description's in the word. It's a postal vote, and it's anticipated, presumably by government, that electors will put postal votes in the big red things which sit on the corners. If they don't, then this process kicks in. Anything which does not come through Royal Mail, one of these forms will have to be filled out. If that makes sense. Well, no, it may not make sense, but that's what the process is. But if they don't fill one of these forms out as it's handed in, then it's rejected.
It doesn't go in the envelope where you put your postal vote. You hand your postal vote with one of these alongside it as a separate piece of paper.
No, you put it in the envelope. You do exactly the same as you would if you were putting it in the post box. If you take it to a polling station will have a stack of these as well. And the elector will have to fill out section 2 and the staff in the polling station will have to fill out section 3.
So how do you ensure they don't get separated from the actual envelope? So if you've gone to a polling station with your closed postal vote and they say you've got to fill one of these, do they then open up the envelope to put one of these in it? Or I'm sorry, I might be being really thick here.
No, they will wrap this around the envelope, put it into a tamper evident bag, the two things together, however many they get, and that bag will be sealed and it will be collected during the day. We collect them during the day now anyway, and you hand it into a polling station, so that we can open them rather than at the count. Except one's handed in after 6 o'clock because obviously we can't keep going round and round. But if somebody comes into the polling station and just leaves their postal vote and doesn't fill one of these in, then that will be rejected. And the member of staff in the polling station will have to fill out section 3 saying this one's rejected.
Sorry, just a couple of follow-ons. Do we know how many of votes are cast this way? How many postal votes are hand delivered rather than through the Royal Mail? As to whether this is a bit like the voter ID, how much is this going to actually create in terms of, there was the claim before voter ID was for fraudulent, votes being cast. Do we know how many votes are cast this way that could potentially be disrupting the whole voting process? And the other thing I'm concerned about is when the voter ID was coming in, we'd already got comms out in the January about those changes, and I haven't. Well, this is the first I've heard of it. What is the comms plan for this? Because I know we did start the end of January last time with voter ID.
We will be doing comms for this. The issue is slightly different because this kicks in for elections which are on the 2nd of May. We are still running any number of elections which you may not be aware of. For parish councils, neighbourhood plans, etc. So this won't have kicked in until the 2nd of May election process starts. And the postal votes will not go out until mid-April, let's say. So we need to make sure the comms hit at the right time, i.e. sort of the early part of April, so that people realise and continue on right up until polling day.
All right, and the first question, do we know how many votes get cast this way?
Just as a simple example, we had a neighbourhood plan referendum, as Councillor Philip knows, in Wales last Thursday. I collected roughly 50 postal votes handed in at polling stations from 3 polling stations. It's still a large number if you've got to fill these in. Yeah. I mean, in total, the number of postal votes cast was 800. And the number of people voting in the polling station was considerably less.
Well, Dawn, I hope that's cleared things up for you. Theo.
I just wanted to go back to what Stephen was asking earlier, and I think I might be helpful. I think what Stephen was asking was, has we ever in Somerset counted 2 parliamentary elections at the same time? And yes, the answer is indeed in South Somerset, Somerton and Frome and Yeovil. Yeah.
Mandy.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand consistency at the moment between post office and delivering to a council office. Because for me, if you put your vote in the post office, it goes into the post box, a postman comes along and empty it. So that's another person. Goes into a sorting office, it's sorted, that's another person handling it. It will then go through various places and it will come in a bag, presumably to a council office where our sorting postal department will be handling it. So you've probably got half a dozen people that will be handling that postal vote, as opposed to a member of the public putting it in a council box. Now, in the post office delivering, they're not delivering to you, they are delivering to a post office section, and someone from there will take it to you or whomever's counting. And I just don't understand how that's any different to opening up a council post office and also delivering it to you, and that they are both being received by council employees. So I'm trying to understand the difference.
Well, I personally, and you know, Stephen may tell me if I'm wrong, I think this comes down to the legal status of post. I think, is it not illegal to open post that isn't for you? Whereas, so if it's for the returning officer, if anybody else opens that but the returning officer, that would be illegal. Whereas an envelope through a council box is going to be opened by the first administrator that gets to it, which wouldn't necessarily be the returning officer. So I don't know if I'm correct there, if it's the legal status, Stephen.
I think it's just the way that this legislation is particularly worded. It can only be received by somebody authorised. If it's in a post box, it hasn't been delivered to that person who's authorised. It's just been left behind. We will have signs above post boxes which say, do not put postal votes in here. And we'll probably take photographs of it. And if we have to reject them, because everyone we reject, we have to write to.
You have your hand up?
I did. I mean, I think the perceived problem, as I understand it, is that in parts of the country, there have been cases where huge numbers of postal votes have been dumped, basically, hoovered up by particular political parties or sections of the community. And I think it's to try to get away from that you've therefore got the limit of the number that can be delivered by one person at one time. As Mr. Lake says, I think that there is an assumption that if you are posting a postal vote, the likelihood is that you're only doing your own, and you've got therefore less influence over a mass gathering of votes. I think this is really what it's designed to stop. It may be a huge sledgehammer to crack a nut, and it may be the wrong hammer. Who knows? But I think that's what it's trying to do, and Mr. Lake's having to grapple with the practical consequences of it.
Councillor Puggs is right. I mean, that is the perceived problem, but it's different in different parts of the country.
Yeah, if I could bring you in.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, presumably, or just to clarify, presumably, if people do this relatively early on, deliver things to the council offices, you'll be able to write to them in time for them to be reissued with a vote?
No, we can't reissue. Oh, no, because they've already had their postal vote.
So if I don't receive my postal vote, it can be reissued. But if I do receive it and I return it incorrectly, it can't.
Correct.
Would you be able to have that postal vote rejected and then be able to go in and vote in person? No, you wouldn't, would you?
No, you've had your go.
Simon.
Can we move this on? I honestly don't think we're going to change the legislation, and it is what it is, and we just got to let the paperwork go out and the marketing or whatever you call it go out.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think the feelings from the committee are quite clear. I think we're all pretty unified in this, and our sympathies go to you, Stephen. Absolutely. We have, is that Lee online?
Chair, forgive me, just a quick point. It's based on the information you gave a moment ago in relation to one local plan vote, where on 3 polling stations you had potentially 50 postal votes returned. One would suggest that hypothetically, if there's going to be a general election on the 2nd of May, in the officers' risk register will be the need for an extra 3 officers on each polling station to handle the paperwork, both for those that don't turn up with photo ID, and secondly to complete the paperwork in relation to postal votes.
Over to you, Stephen.
We will inevitably have more people in polling stations. There's no choice to do it. Hopefully, if people are coming in to polling stations, then we can stop them their tracks on the way and say, you know, you've got to fill out this form. Or if they're coming without ID, we can say, you know, can you go and get your ID before they get into the polling station? Most, because that will save another lot of form filling. Because we have to fill out 2 different forms every time somebody turns up without an ID. If we can stop them getting to the polling station, then perhaps it might help.
All right, Martin, this will be literally the last question. So after this,
It's not a question. I think that we can, from this group, we can inform the officers and the electoral officers that our strong feeling is that we back any effort made to deal with the communication of this issue correctly, so that we minimise the problem at the end of the line. The election officer has mentioned, I will put a notice on each letterbox at council offices, and from January we will put out the comms saying postal votes means you post it, you don't do anything else with it. Can we just say that we reinforce that approach, and this has our full backing?
I think if that could be demonstrated in the minutes, I think that would be most useful. Absolutely. Right, brilliant. If we could draw a line underneath this item 6 and move on to the last item on the agenda, item 7, which is the work programme. For the next meeting on the 17th of April, we currently have the interim review planning committee terms of reference, interim review licensing and regulatory committee terms of reference, annual report of constitution and governance committee, first year review of Somerset Council constitution and scheme of delegation. So a busy session. Brilliant. Thank you. And I bring the meeting to, Stephen.
Can I just clarify that the 21st of February, which I currently have in my diary now, is not happening? Well, I've got any date in February is not happening.
Okay, February's not happening.
21st of February is definitely out because that's the day after the budget for council, and we definitely don't have a committee meeting that day. Might have been originally, but yeah, that's
okay. But nothing in February for constitution then?
No, because the workshop's going to be moved. Thank you.
Lovely.
Yes, Martin.
And when might we have a June date, please? Just a contingent.
I can't give you a new date right now because I need to go and check for clashes and spaces in the diary. So we'll get that out in due course.
In case I have to give apologies, get that
Yeah.
early, those in early.
Yeah.
All right. David.
Sorry, Chair. We had an officer working group meeting for the local government boundary review exercise yesterday. So we have to submit our submission to the Commission in terms of overall numbers of councillors. That's it, not looking at division boundaries or ward boundaries, but just overall numbers of councillors by the 26th of July. So hopefully we'll have a June date of this committee before that, where we can provide a final draft of that submission. But all things being well, I was intending to bring a first draft of the submission to the April meeting as well. So appreciate we've got a very full agenda, but that's another item to be.
Another item, yeah. Yeah, so if it's full, let's just make it a bit fuller. Brilliant. Well, thank you to all the members, officers today, and those that have joined us online. If I could bring the meeting to a close, thank you very much.
Is it true